Viewer contributions make local programming possible on WNIN. Become a member of WNIN with your contribution so we can continue to make this programming available. Visit WNIN.org and click on the donate button.
Most economic indicators for our region have been fairly strong. So what is the economic forecast for our area? And with new political leaders at the state and federal levels, will their decisions have an impact on our economic outlook? That's next on WNIN Newsmakers. Welcome to WNIN Newsmakers. I'm Noah Alatza, the Chief Communications Officer for the University of Evansville. Our region has had strong economic numbers for a while now, and here to give us the economic forecast for our area is Chuck Gascon, the Research Officer for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you making time. First and foremost, for viewers at home who might not be sure, what does the Federal Reserve Bank necessarily do? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve System is the nation's central bank, and it was created by Congress in 1913 to promote financial stability. Throughout our history, we actually have had a couple different central banks, and they didn't actually succeed. So making it 100 years, over 100 years now for the Fed is a notable accomplishment. As a central bank, we conduct monetary policy, so that's setting overnight interest rates in which banks can borrow and lend with one another or from the central bank. We act as a lender of last resort, also supervise and regulate financial institutions, and we're responsible for developing the payment system and making sure it's safe and efficient. So those are a lot of really key aspects to the underlying economy.
Chuck, what kind of region does St. Louis oversee in terms of the work that you do at the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, so the way the central bank was set up, we actually have 12 offices across the nation, and the St. Louis Fed's district includes a 7-state region with our headquarter office in St. Louis, and we cover kind of western Kentucky, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, all the way down to the entire state of Arkansas. And we do work not only within the region, supervising and regulating banks within the region, but we also do work on behalf of the entire Federal Reserve System and the entire nation.
Walk me through what the general economic forecast is looking like for the region.
Yeah, so let me start by setting the foundation. If you look back in 2024, we had really robust economic growth nationally, around 2.5%, and the unemployment rate ended the year really close to 4%, which is historically pretty low. Within the Evansville region, growth was a little bit slower, and I'll talk about why that's the case here in a minute. But the unemployment rate also ended the year below 4%, so a really healthy economy. When we look into the year ahead, there's considerable uncertainty. And so I think as a baseline, I expect growth to continue to moderate back to some of these longer run trends. As you mentioned earlier, we've had a couple of years of very strong growth. So as that growth slows, I expect that to lead the unemployment rate to drift up slightly, just as there's fewer job openings out there, and it may take people a little bit longer to find a new job as they're switching around. Within the region, there's a higher concentration in manufacturing activity. And so that means that any changes in the national economy, be them on the positive side or on the negative side, tend to be amplified because the manufacturing economy is very interlinked within the broader region.
So you mentioned that slowdown, particularly in the Evansville region. Can you explain why that's happening right now?
Yeah, so at a very high level, you can kind of think about the economy as kind of getting off this highway off ramp where we were going well above trend and going faster than probably the long run trend over the last couple of years. And now we're just getting back to a normal pace of growth. It feels pretty slow to some people, but it's actually getting back to something that looks a little bit more like normal. Within the region, the trend rate of growth tends to be a little bit slower than the national average, and that has to do with just demographic and migration patterns. We have a little bit of an older population and not the strong inflows of population that you may see in a place like Texas or in the Southeast. And so those places tend to be growing above the national average and pushing that average up. So within the broader Midwestern region, the demographics just lead to a trend rate of growth that's a little bit slower than the nation.
What are those implications going to look like then, Chuck, when you're looking at these economic indicators, the economic forecast? What is that going to look like here in the next several years if we keep seeing perhaps a decline?
Yeah, so there's two things that have that go into overall output. One is the labor component of it, and the other one is all the capital and the productivity that goes along with it. So we can see labor force growth slow, as we've seen nationally and within the region. But as long as productivity, so the amount of output per worker hour you get, continues to accelerate, you can continue to see healthy growth. Over the last couple of years, we have seen those labor productivity numbers be quite strong. So that's allowed growth to be at a healthy clip, even with labor force growth being relatively moderate. So it's kind of a combination of what do businesses do when they're constrained on the labor front? Are they able to make investments to get more output per worker?
I'm curious too, historically speaking, how accurate have these Federal Reserve Bank's forecasts been? Just in your time there, in your experience, what have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So let me start by saying, any economic forecaster will tell you that they're more likely to be wrong than right. So I think that's the baseline we have to start with. Part of our job is to give forecasts, and they can provide useful insights for the path ahead and help us understand risk. But generally speaking, forecasters are wrong. So let's start with that baseline. Within the Federal Reserve System, there are many different forecasting models that are run and many different forecasts that are out there. So it's really kind of hard to give a definitive answer. But what researchers have typically found is that a consensus forecast, or what you can consider to be the average across all professional forecasters, tends to be the most accurate forecast over the long run and over time. The Fed has a survey of professional forecasters, so that's a really good resource if you're trying to get a sense of what these forecasts are looking like. Other research in the academic space has generally found that some of the Fed's internal forecasts for inflation tend to be more accurate than private sector forecasters. But again, I would point to kind of the survey of professional forecasters to really get a broad consensus, and that's over the long run tends to be the most accurate path forward.
Very, very interesting. And I want to switch gears now. Obviously, we have a new president in office now for the last several weeks. He's enacted a few changes to federal policies that we've seen since his time began back on January 20th. Have those changes that he's made altered the economic outlook, number one? And number two, curious on how the tariffs perhaps might play an impact in looking at that outlook.
So let me take a minute and explain our process at the St. Louis Fed and across the Fed system for kind of understanding what's going on in the economy. And that is to reach out to businesses and hear from people, boots on the ground, what's affecting them. And we summarize that information and report it in our Beige Book report. So the last Beige Book report came out in January, and that information was collected in the beginning part of January. What we were hearing from contacts at that point in time is that there were a lot of concerns about disruptions to overseas supply chains, and contacts had noted that they had kind of expedited their deliveries to mitigate any short-term disruptions. So I think within the near term, businesses were attuned to the sense that tariffs were likely going to be enacted as they were part of the campaign. And so they were making adjustments ahead of time to offset any disruptions that they could see. With respect to the outlook, again, this is at the beginning of January, they were generally optimistic, but they did express concerns that changes to immigration and tariff policies could have a negative effect on the economy, and that was something they were attuned to. Currently, we are in the process of collecting updated information from our contacts, and we're going to put the Beige Book report together, and that'll be released on March 5th, and that'll give you the most up-to-date information on what we're hearing from our contacts with respect to most recent changes in the economy.
Another topic, Chuck, on a lot of people's mind, inflation. How do you think that we're doing so far right now when it comes to that?
So there was a CPI data released this morning, and what it showed was that the January data was stronger than expected, and it was the fourth consecutive month where the month-to-month change in inflation was actually accelerating. So, the current rate of inflation is right around 3%. That's much lower than it was just a few years ago when prices were rising at about 9% from 1 year ago. But it is still slightly elevated. So, when I look at the risks to inflation, there are some foundations there that for us to anticipate inflation to moderate over the next couple of quarters. But there does seem to be some upside risk, and it is showing up in the most recent prints that have been, like I said, a bit higher than expected.
Chuck, just curious too, and I know you already touched on a little bit of this in an earlier question, just looking at some of the factors perhaps that might dramatically change the economic forecast in our area. I know that you mentioned, an aging population, particularly in Evansville. You also mentioned some other things as well. Is there any major factor, though, that comes into play when you're looking at the economic forecast, particularly for Evansville?
Yeah, so I think we always have to be attuned to national and international risks and disruptions that can spill over to the region. You think about the COVID pandemic that started in another part of the world and ultimately impacted the region. Those are always risks that we have to be mindful of. There are also positive risks that can occur. So positive developments can also spill over the region. Again, being so concentrated in manufacturing, those things can have a major impact. Otherwise, what we're looking at are firm-specific shocks or a regional specific shock. So a firm either gets a new line of business and then they add employees, or they're struggling for profitability and have to lay off workers. Those are the kind of things that can ultimately impact the region that are difficult to anticipate, and they can be both good or bad. I think we have to be clear that when I talk about shocks, I'm not talking about negative shocks. I'm also talking about positive things. It's just that they're unanticipated. And, as I outlined with the tariff changes, if these things are anticipated, businesses and households typically adapt ahead of time. And so those things can often be realized beforehand. So those are surprises that are we have to monitor them, but they're often not on our radar immediately.
And that's a really good point that you make there about there being these negative, but also, right, those positive shocks that can happen as well. Chuck, anything else that you want individuals to know, particularly here in the tri-state region, about the economy as we get a little bit deeper into 2025?
Yeah, I just posted a blog post the other day, and it was looking at job growth across the nation by metro area. And we talk a lot about national averages. And for example, in the blog post, I noted that, job growth in the nation was just shy of 4.5% last year. But there are very different outcomes across the nation, and few places are right there at the national average. And so I found that about 60% of metropolitan areas actually experienced growth that was below average. So it's not surprising when I go out and talk to different people, and you may feel in your own economies that things just don't seem to be matching up with the headline data. And that's appropriate, and that's likely true in many cases because we are aggregating things up at a very high level. And the U.S. economy is very big and very diverse. And so people's lived experiences across the nation may not always align with what they're seeing in the newspaper when it comes to the aggregate data.
Chuck Gascon, the research officer for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, thank you for your time, your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to talk to you.
Next, we'll be talking to Dr. Perry Burnett, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Southern Indiana, for even more localized analysis. Perry, thank you so much for making time. First, what is your area of expertise in economics?
My formal training is in urban and regional economics. Over the last number of years, I've been doing more research in intrapersonal economics and even the economics of religion.
I'm curious, what are some of the economic strengths that you're seeing right now in the tri-state region?
So we are a very well-diversified local economy. I think the previous guest talked a lot about manufacturing, which we do have a whole lot of manufacturing. And I think just take the time and to appreciate the incredible amount of manufacturing we do. When you take a look at the data, you can't really go into any specific industry within manufacturing and not find that we have a specialization in the area. So it is really a testament to what we do here in the manufacturing area. But we've been able to supplement and complement that recently with growth in the financial services, especially with growth in the medical services, with our two big hospitals located in the area, as well as our financial headquarters that are located in the area. Also, we do a lot with agricultural in the local area, as well as warehousing.
Are you seeing any weaknesses then, of course, in the region as well right now?
So weaknesses aren't really in terms of what we do, but primarily if you take a look at where we're doing it. So in other words, if you take a look at the history of Evansville, the reason we exist is because we are on a waterfront, which we have nice fresh water. We also have low transportation costs, as well we sit on a big pile of energy. And so that was fantastic for, a century ago, 50 years ago. But we've kind of transitioned to needing different kinds of things in urban areas. And so we kind of missed on I-64 a little bit, but we're building I-69, which which can help with some of the transportation costs. So we got to find out, where we are and how we utilize our specific location to kind of find new economic growth patterns in the future.
When that new 69 bridge does eventually open between Evansville and Henderson, what can we expect to see in terms of economic influence or additional industries, perhaps? How does that gateway open up the door for additional?
Right. It's all about when you manufacture something or when you produce something, you need to make an exchange. And so part of that exchange is price, but also the other part of that exchange is transaction costs. And that transaction cost also includes transportation costs. So when you can lower transportation costs into a geographic area, more people can come in, more people can leave at a cheaper price or cheaper overall cost, which should increase economic activity.
Perry, I'm curious too, we have a new president, we've got a new governor as well. Are there any external factors, whether that be at the state, at the federal, national level, that may influence the economic outlook, particularly for the tri-state?
So I think as a previous guest mentioned, we denote two things in economics. We have what's called stated preference is what people say, and revealed preference is what people do. And so a lot of what we're experiencing right now is a transaction or transition in from a stated preference to a revealed preference. In other words, we have all these political promises that have been made, but we're trying to find out how they actually look in terms of policy. And right now, I think the biggest policy that we're trying to deal with is uncertainty, as the previous guest said. We don't know really exactly where these policies are going to land, and that's something that businesses are going to have to account for.
What information should people look at as an indicator that the economic forecast will change?
Again, we're looking for shocks. Everything has been built in that has been built in so far. In other words, all of these kinds of chaos aspects or positive aspects have been built into expectations. So I guess to answer your question, anything that changes expectations. So when we try to build that in to our future behavior, so when expectations change due to some kind of external shock, positive or negative, that's going to change our expectations and then therefore change behavior that way.
I'm curious, you mentioned earlier manufacturing, healthcare as some of these bigger industries. Is there going to be any additional growth in the job market that doesn't necessarily include manufacturing or healthcare? Is there anything in particular that comes to mind?
I think going back to maybe a strength that we have that is kind of overlooked a lot is the Dean and I did some current research in this area. And what Evansville has a lot of is social capital. So we have a very strong local specialization when it comes to civic and social organizations. I think we're about 150% more concentrated in civic and social organizations, which is we get to know each other a little bit better in a more formal way. And I think that is an amenity that we could tap into that could lead to growth in some of these social capital type of industries. That it's always a good place to raise a family, but it's also a good place to get to know your neighbor. So we have these institutions that is a way for us to tap into future economic growth.
And that social capital, just by merely socializing with neighbors, that can also, as you said, bolster some of that economic
Absolutely.
growth.
I think one thing that gets lost in terms of these large conversations on economics is if you take a look at the basic theory of how we operate and what our economy is built on, it's built on exchange. And I think what's happened over a number of years and over technology and technological advancement is that exchange has become transactions. And so really what you're doing is you want to make social exchanges. So when you're at Schnucks, when you're at the local coffee shop, Honeymoon, when you're at these places, you want to interact and make an exchange with somebody. So be vulnerable, make an exchange with somebody. Don't just make a transaction. And that's really going to lead to higher levels of economic growth because it's going to increase trust. Trust is a foundation when it comes to making exchanges with people. And so therefore, that's really what economics is about. And I think there's lots of great areas that we have, maybe with Haney's Corner growing, right, with Franklin Street. We have local amenities to make those exchanges where we really can tap into that social capital.
Perry, is there something for guests at home that they might be shocked to learn about the local tri-state economy, something that's surprising to you, even in your research and your time?
I guess I take a little bit different perspective. We talk about demographic changes. And I know it's typically thought of as we were getting older. And there's a conversation about a brain drain. I think a better way to think about that is as an advantage as opposed to maybe a disadvantage. I think maybe instead of us thinking a brain drain, we should be thinking about a gray rain. is what I want to call it. If you take a look at our demographics, over the next 5 years, I think we're going to get an increase in about 20% with people over the age of 70. And over the next 10 years, about 30% with an increase with people over 70. Really, in Evansville, we're going to have about between 1 and 5 or 6 people, so about 17, 20% is going to be over the age of 70. And so I think this is a great way to tap into these resources that are typically maybe overlooked. There's a big difference in the world between knowledge and wisdom. And I think this gray rain has the ability to impact us by sharing wisdom that is not available that in terms of TikTok information that we usually get. So I kind of look at that as a positive and something that we can tap into as a resource as opposed to something negative.
That's very, very fascinating stuff. Anything else that you want people to know about the economy in general, whether that's the local economy, the national economy?
I think trying to take a look at some case studies about where Evansville is and some areas that are growing. Macon, Georgia is a very interesting case example. What they have done to really kind of turn their transition around. We used to drive through there all the time, and it used to be a ghost town. Now it's like a thriving community, it appears. And what they really have done is they have tapped into those, this is who we are. Right, this is the foundation of who we are. We have this great music heritage in Macon. Let's tap into that. Let's really take a look at our own comparative advantage as opposed to national views of the economy. Let's look at local views of the economy. And I think that's something that I would like to emphasize is local is culture, and the way that we grow is we grow from our local comparative advantages as opposed to these kind of national trends.
We focus on Evansville and Vanderburgh County. What comes to mind is Newburgh, right? We continue to see them grow rapidly in Warwick County. The question for you is related to, are you seeing in the tri-state, particularly Southwest Indiana, is there one county that's growing exponentially? Is it Warwick County, another county?
When the research that we've done in it, we've really only looked at the Evansville MSA. We haven't really gone down into specific counties. And the reason we look at the MSA is because, we do have those people in Warwick County. The professional community does commute a lot into Vanderburgh County. So there's commuting patterns that link these counties together. And so the MSA area is typically what we look at because of those commuting patterns, how integrated they all are. And so you're really not going to get a whole lot of differentiation among areas within an MSA.
Okay, very fascinating. Dr. Perry Burnett, Associate Professor of Economics from the University of Southern Indiana, thank you for sharing your expertise and making time. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Welcome to a special WNIN Newsmakers segment highlighting local businesses. Joining us today is Mary Allen, owner of 6th and 0. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, tell me about what kind of products and services you have at your business.
Yeah, so we focus on sustainability. We have a refillery there, so that's a really popular aspect of our business. We started out as a simple soap making company, natural body products, thinking about how can we be less toxic in our life, and have ventured into this low-waste lifestyle, clean living shop. And so a lot of folks come, like I said, for the refillery that's in the back of our store. You can bring your own containers. We want to try to rid people's lives of plastic, knowing the impact on our health and the environment. And so people can bring in their own containers or reuse the ones they already have, and fill up anything by the ounce, from organic spices and beans and rice to hairspray, conditioners, cleaners, that kind of thing.
And where do those things come from?
Yeah, we source things from a variety of places, and we do our homework. And that's the thing I really want people to know, that when they walk in the door, they can feel good about whatever they're getting because we've done the work for them. I mean, by all means, double check me and we could miss something. We still do. We make our own bar soaps, body moisturizers, face care line that are super clean. We make in-house. But the things that we curate, we're very intentional. We try to focus on women-owned businesses. Are they B corporations? Are they doing good things themselves as companies that we can bring in? And ultimately, are the ingredients clean and safe for the people purchasing them and for the environment?
So when you talk about the soap making, are you doing that in the back of the store? Do you have where are you set up for that?
Yeah, we have done that. We started on 6th Street, so that's our name. 6th Street Soapery is how we started out in 6th and Washington and Haney's Corner. And we moved to Main Street now, and kept the 6th as a homage to our roots, but added the 0 as we've moved into more of a zero waste lifestyle shop. We know there's no such thing as zero waste, but it's just, you know, a thing.
It's an intention.
It's an intention, yes, yeah. To set what's one next thing toward that, on that journey, right? So we've grown, and actually we've grown quite a bit to where we no longer make it out of the back of our shop. I work with a friend of mine who manufactures on Oak Hill Road, and so that's where our recipes, we still make our body products, face line products in the back. It doesn't take up as much room and space, but our soap making is now over on Oak Hill Road, and because we have grown in a sense to where now we have drums of product for refill versus, you know, 5-gallon buckets and things like that.
Wow.
It takes up more room.
Was this something you always wanted to do? Like, I mean, have you always experimented with making soaps and things, or how did that come about?
It came about from a homeschool project with my daughter back way long ago. She's a teacher herself now, but it's all chemistry, and that we needed a chemistry project, and then it starts you on that journey of being intentional and realizing what ingredients are in the things we're using. And, you know, we're intentional about what we eat, but I wasn't intentional about what we put on our body, and knowing that impact. And so it just started us on this great journey. And so I've been making soap for 16, 18 years now, but just started as a business in 2016.
So how do you see your business growing and expanding in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. We just want to be a resource for the community, and we've already grown. The community's been good to us, and we always want to give back, and we've grown in such a way, in little increment, organic ways, from our in-home shop to now being on Main Street and beginning to sort of outgrow that a bit. But we want to be a resource. We want to be a place that people come and not just buy something, but we can be educators as well and help people along their journey. They don't have to buy anything when they come in. They can just come and we'll share and we'll learn and journey this sustainable lifestyle together, just making one small step at a time. That's what I encourage folks, and it ultimately for our health and benefit, but the health and for our environment and for the next generations coming up.
Thanks to our guests today for talking about the economic forecast for our area. I'm Noah Alatza, Chief Communications Officer for the University of Evansville. Thanks for watching WNIN Newsmakers.